It's time to get back to speaking, and I'm kind of proud to present this one. Of course, all the other, but in particular, there are a couple I'm more into them. We are used to, new disruptive applications, apps. Maybe they save us headaches. Maybe they give us a new possibility or unexpected things. But this is what you have when you satisfy first word need. I am proud to introduce this one. And this is actually one picture. We had a field work in Lebanon. This guy is a Syrian refugee in Lebanon. He was trying a prototype we were doing. I'm not gonna, spoiler any further, but I'm proud to introduce this project because, as noise, we helped Emmanuel team in WFT back in July, and we did some field research and some usability testing and some workshop with the guys. And I can confess that me and Chiara, which is sitting somewhere right there, we were almost crying at the end of the workshop because you have to imagine that those guys actually told us a lot of stories about their lives. They don't have any family anymore. They just moved to Lebanon from Syria and all this stuff. And it was a very dark mood at the very beginning of the workshop. And then at the end of the prototype, this guy, one of the darkest mood guy, was like this, trying the application. It was like, okay, this is a way to, balance ourselves into what we are doing. This is why we are doing this job, because this is what the impact could be. So I want to introduce Emmanuel Sevrin, which is a UN Food Program Manager with Designing for Refugees Population, Lesson Learned and Opportunities. Please welcome.
Thanks. Okay. Good afternoon. So, can you guys hear me? Yes? Fantastic. So, yes, my name is Emmanuel. I work for the United Nations World Food Program in Lebanon, where I've been designing digital solutions for the Syrian refugee population for now over 6 months. And I want to share some of my learnings and some of my experience with you today. I will start by just giving you a brief overview and a brief background over the Syrian population crisis in Lebanon and the region. Then say a few words about what we've done. And then finally, I'll share the 5 biggest challenges we faced designing products for those populations. I want to start by also saying I'm not a UX designer. I'm not a user research expert. So I don't have learnings and tips and advice as much as experience of trying to build something for those populations. But that's kind of what I want to share today. So I think many of you are familiar with images like that, images from the war in Syria that now has lasted over 6 years, with at least 4 different factions fighting for territory across the whole country. And we think that about half of the population has now been displaced outside of Syria. So that means that about 6.5 million people have left the country seeking security and shelter outside of the borders of Syria. And that creates a double challenge for the international humanitarian community. First, intervening in Syria itself, sometimes in war zones, to be able to protect or support the populations in the country, but of course also supporting the populations that leave the country and are in a challenging personal, economic, health situation in other countries. So just a few words of context. We think that there is about 6.5 million refugees that left Syria and went to other countries, and the vast majority of them are in the directly neighboring countries: Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon. And of those 4, Lebanon welcomed a large amount of people, about 1.5 million people, which, given the population of the country that is about 6 million, explains that now about 25% of people living in Lebanon are refugees. On top of about 10% of refugees from Palestine, makes Lebanon the country with the most refugees in the world per capita. Just to give you a sense, it's as if within a 5-year period, Italy was welcoming 15 million people into its borders, people that typically left with nothing and don't know how to live in the new country. The situation of those refugees is complex because some of them have legal refugee rights, others don't, and therefore without legal rights they cannot work, so they don't have means to sustain themselves over the long term, and they need to find ways to be able to just come by. They don't have access to education, they don't have access to healthcare. Many of them live in informal settlements or by squatting existing buildings. And so we think that about 80% of them are under the level of poverty, and we think that over 90% of them are in debt from friends and families just to be able to sustain themselves. And so our challenge as international organizations, particularly as UN organizations, is both to be able to work on the short term, so give them direct opportunities to live by day to day and come to their immediate needs, but also try to create opportunities for the longer term and try to create rights and a future for them and their families. So the main interventions we do in Lebanon is food intervention. That's what my organization does, the World Food Program. The other UN organizations were more on healthcare and housing, particularly the High Commissioner for Refugees and UNICEF. Our main intervention is related to food, and we're able to serve about 700,000 people, so about half of the refugee population benefits from our help. And this help takes the form of a credit card, pretty much like a MasterCard. In fact, it is a MasterCard that you can use in specific shops to be able to get to buy food items. So think of it as a family of 2 parents and 4 kids. They have one credit card, and the credit card can be used on a monthly basis in specific shops to buy about $150 of food items. It's not much. We admit that it doesn't allow for a total existence comfortably, but it's the extent that can afford the level of funding that we benefit at the moment. So that's kind of the challenge we face. And just to say a few words about one thing that is changing in this context, it's the level of internet penetration. Those are the numbers that we have about expectations of smartphone access all around the world. And we may not see it from here because most of you, like me, I imagine, are used to having internet for the last 5 years or so. We're used to having smartphone over at least 3 years. We're used to being constantly connected now, and we don't necessarily see changes today and the last year and the year ahead. But the price of a smartphone is incredibly decreasing. The price of data is also decreasing. And as a result, more and more vulnerable populations have access to smartphones. In fact, we think that by 2020, about 80% of the world will be connected to the internet. And many of them will still be people that need help to feed themselves, to house themselves, etc. So the opportunity and the question for the international community is, how can we leverage this? How can we use that to offer a better experience or to create new opportunities for those people who have been displaced? Just to start with some ideas that have been tested in other contexts than Lebanon, those are 2 examples of projects that have been tried in Afghanistan and Kenya, mostly chatbot through WhatsApp or Messenger, to be able to help people directly access more information than what we currently can provide them through text message. So we're trying to see, okay, everybody has access to internet now. Can we use that to help them know what's happening and help them know what kind of rights and assistance they have the right to? And as far as I'm concerned, I've been trying to work on the same issue in the context of Lebanon. As it turns out, Lebanon is a great place to be able to experiment and build such solutions. First of all, because it's a very small country. So if you need to access your user, if you need to talk to people that might use this help, you don't need to ride for 5 hours or 6 hours to be able to get them as you could in Kenya, Uganda, or Somalia, or even Guatemala. You can directly drive, and it's typically a 20 or 50-minute drive to be able to access some of those refugees. But on top of that, the smartphone penetration is extremely high. We think it's above 85%. So virtually everybody is connected. And the population is also relatively young, so it creates a number of people that are relatively digitally savvy. You won't be surprised to hear that the main application that people use is WhatsApp, because it feeds the main need of refugee population. Staying in touch with their close ones, staying in touch with their families, letting them know that they're okay, letting them know where they are, knowing where their close ones are, just hearing from one another is the main function that it feeds, and you would be amazed by how everybody in those communities know WhatsApp, uses WhatsApp, and almost just get the app, just get a smartphone just to get WhatsApp. Many of them also use Facebook and YouTube, but by far WhatsApp is the clear winner in terms of percentage of use in those population group. So we've been working in those contexts for the last 5 months and trying to understand, okay, what opportunities might exist of building something with them to make their lives better, to create new opportunities for them, to enhance their customer experience, or to help them understand about the world. And one of those experiments that we've tried is this application called Dalili, that in fact we just released last week. You can find it on the Google Play Store if you have an Android. If you just type Dalili WFP, you can download it. It's basically an application that helps people see which shops they can redeem their card on, so which shops they can buy on, and what are the prices of the different items nearby. And we've developed that because that was the main need that people expressed, being able to know if they're being taken advantage of by the shops near them, being able to know if the price of the food that they pay is the correct price or not. You might be interested to know that between Lebanon and Syria, even though they are very close countries, the price of living is radically different. It's much more expensive to live in Lebanon than in Syria. And therefore, people were very surprised of paying a much higher price when they arrived in Lebanon. And they thought they were being taken advantage of because they were Syrian. And even now, I think a few years later, people are not so surprised anymore, but they still feel that the shops that they buy to sometimes increase the price just for them, or sometimes just take advantage of them. So the goal of this app is to help them see what is the average price for those items, what is the price in their shop, and how does it compare to nearby shops. They won't necessarily go and shop somewhere else. I mean, they can if they want to, but at least they can make a more informed decision, and they can decide in advance from the comfort of their home where to go and buy something. Okay, so this is the product that we've built. And I want to just share for the rest of my presentation the main challenges that we faced building this product. Just to share with you the issues and the insights we've learned by working with this population group. The first one, I think, is actually one that is very frequent in any big organization, in any big company that wants to innovate, I think, is facing this challenge. You're an employee of the organization, you wake up one day and you have this great innovation idea. You think we should build an app, or we should build this platform, or we should build this digital connected object. And then you talk about it with your office mates, you talk about it with your colleagues, you talk about it with your boss, you talk about it with the director that's in visit, you talk about it with your IT unit, and you talk about it with the marketing team, and with your partners. And before you know it, you've talked about it to 30 people, and none of them are your actual users. So you have no idea if your idea actually solves a problem. You have no idea if your idea is actually relevant or if it can work. But before you know it, you've kind of put yourself in a straitjacket by saying, I have this great idea, we should build this app, and this is what you should do. But you don't know how it could be applied in the context where you operate. And that's just by the mere physics, if I may say, of living in an office where you're surrounded by people who are your colleagues, who are your friends, who are the people that you interact with, but none of them are the people that you would design for. And I knew about this problem, coming to Lebanon. Like, I know that one of the challenges of innovating for big organizations, I think, is that people are much more drawn into stakeholder management and internal politics than they are into facing the customer and interacting with the customer. So I knew about this challenge coming in, and yet I must say it's incredibly hard to find the discipline and the effort to constantly go to meet the user, check your assumptions with them, show your products, hear their stories, try to understand how it could solve their problems. Simply because the normal place where you're supposed to work is an office surrounded by people, and everybody has an opinion on the product you're trying to develop, so they're all influencing you. And it takes a certain amount of discipline to say, this is great, all those perspectives, but I'm not going to listen to any of them. I'm going to make the effort every week or every 2 weeks to go and meet customers, to go and meet users, and listen to their point of view. And even if it requires 30 minutes drive away from my office, even if it requires meeting new people and having to explain the product all over again, and trying to listen to them not being interested or having them focus on something else, that's what can drive my insights. That's what can I drive my decision making, much more than the opinion of my 5 managers who all have different perspectives on the product I should develop. Again, that has been a real just challenge of, I think, any operating model for any team in a big organization to just find the discipline of constantly connecting with the users. The number 2 challenge we had was really understanding the problems that people face. My assumption is many of you here have experience in user design, so you are familiar with the ways to engage with users to get to insights. Things like asking open-ended questions, allowing for silence, asking why multiple times, getting to the emotional need behind the problem. All those ways of having a dialogue that is more really something that is open and leads to people sharing personal information as opposed to a direct targeted conversation getting at information. It's not extremely complex, but it did take us some time to be able to train our staff to interact with refugee population in such a way. I think as an organization, but as many organizations, we are trained to, interrogating people, asking people in a very targeted way. How many people do you have in the family? How many people have a source of income? How long have you been in Lebanon? Where do you live? Where does your family live? Having kind of a questionnaire that you go through line by line to be able to just go through the questions and have data that will assess how vulnerable that people is, which is a great way to be able to get some quantified data across the country and build a picture of what are the challenges, but it's not a great way to collect insights to be able to build a good product. So we had to train our partners, we had to train our field monitors when they went and interrogated people to be able to, again, ask the right questions, allow for silence, make this open conversation so that we will generate some insights into what are the actual challenges that people face to be able to collect insights and design the right product. The third challenge we faced is finding out which user we should design for first, I want to say. As you can imagine, like any population group, it's a very diverse group with very diverse level of familiarity with technology, from people who are fairly well educated, have doctorates or PhDs or masters, and they adapt very fast, they're very familiar with technologies, they get it very quickly. In fact, they make you proactive suggestions that are very useful, all the way to people who don't know how to read, they don't have a smartphone, they don't want to use it, and all the spectrum in between. And I think this is nothing new for any innovator, but we had to decide how do we prioritize between all those user groups, which one do we target first. And as I'm sure you're familiar, when you're trying to design for people in vulnerable situations, you need to make this choice. I mean, it's a hard trade-off because the easiest users are not necessarily the users that could benefit the most from your solution. So you need to decide, okay, how do I prioritize between helping the most vulnerable or making a product that people will easily understand? Our strategy is to try to follow the steps of WhatsApp. That means start with the easiest user, start with the user that will get it the quickest and be most interested in our solution, and then slowly work our way up into people who don't know how to read, who have never used any product, who just like something that is talked to them progressively. But that is a choice, that is a strategy. I can't tell in advance if it's going to work, but I can tell you this choice of where do we prioritize the first user has been something that we've been thinking a lot over the last couple of months. The fourth challenge we faced, and that's one of them where Carlo and his team really helped us, is thinking about the right way to design. You know, we are all familiar with a number of assumptions when we design a product about how the screen should work, about how tapping on it should make it react, and all of those habits become assumptions when you're working with refugee populations who don't necessarily have that much digital experience. On top of that, you need to add different cultural background, different language habits, writing in Arabic as opposed to in English, where typically you read from right to left and not left to right. And so we need to make choices about what are the kind of icons, what are the kind of design that will talk to those populations or not. I am tempted to say that this proved less of a challenge than we thought. It is not like those people, those population groups, those users can't be taught how to use products the same way that we do, and how they are very familiar with the way to interact with their smartphone the way that we are. But the truth is, I'm not absolutely certain that that's the case. We are still trying to work out what is the best way to see how people read this device, what is the best way to understand how they respond to it, which is a challenge that I'm sure many user researchers are very familiar with, but that we faced when developing our product. I think one intervenant this morning talked about how when you're in the room, people react differently. And it's definitely a dynamic that we've observed, because as a UN organization, we have a huge influence over the lifestyle of those people, and typically they're worried about how, if they do X or if they do Y, we might cut their assistance or we might cut their rights, or potentially we might report them to the Lebanese government. And so our interactions with them, when we go in there with the vest of the UN or the vest of the World Food Programme, already has a number of emotional or formal attachment to it. And so we needed to be able to, again, create this comfort relationship or this direct relationship where we could get their feedback without feeling like it was an exam and they needed to answer something right or wrong, or they would lose their help. Again, I want to say that we've made progress on it, and I want to say that we've been able to achieve really good insights. But the absolute answer is I'm not totally sure, because we're not in the presence of every home to be able to monitor how people use this solution. And finally, the fifth challenge that we faced, and it's the one that keeps me up the most at night, is how does our product impact the local dynamics? How does our product impact the local politics? If you take a group of 200 people and you put them somewhere and you say, okay, now 20 of you will get cards with some cash to it and you can buy money, 10 of you will get a specific type of help, you create inequalities, you create power dynamics, you create specific types of relationship within the group. And unless you're present there all the time, you can't really know for sure, what are the kind of consequences of this power dynamic. Are there going to be any potential abuse? Are there going to be any missteps? Are there going to be any misuses of the help that you give? Are people going to use it for the purpose that you intend, or are they going to use it for something else? You can never really be sure. And that's why any big international organization has designed very strong monitoring tools to be able to monitor, okay, what is the impact there? What is the impact, for example, on gender dynamics in the home? What is the impact on the relationships between the different players? And I think our applications don't escape this question. We start by giving information to some people, those people with smartphones. How does it impact the relationship between those Syrian populations and the Palestinian retailers? Do they feel like they're being treated fairly? Do they feel like we're, favoring the Syrians over the Lebanese too much? Do they think that we're giving too much power over the Syrian population and not enough to the average Lebanese? Do we favor unfairly some shops against others because they're cheaper? Of course, we don't do that, but those could be some of the dynamics that are created and that we really need to monitor closely to make sure that we don't create more harm than good in the settings where we operate. And that's where all the techniques of the lean startup, where you start with a prototype, you have a closed groups to begin with, and you can really monitor what happens and get feedback, can help us. And I want to say, I also hope really here that the access to internet and the access to smartphones help us, because the more people will have access to the internet, direct access to the internet, the more they can have direct access to us, the more I think they will feel empowered to tell us directly what are the challenges or the problems they face, and the more we will be easier to intervene. As opposed to a setting where you would have the mother of a household that lets her husband manage the relationship, that works with a retailer, that touches base with one of our cooperating partners, that talks with us, a chain of 6 people. If you can have a direct link with anyone in the system and give them the chance to be able to report any complaint or any challenge, I think the better position we will be in to be able to face any challenge and be able to react to it very quickly. So my hope again is by enhancing access to information, enhancing transparency, we will increase the capacity for anyone to report any conflict, and we will decrease the chance of potential misuse of the system. But I also want to acknowledge that we don't have complete transparency in every household of what is the impact of our interventions in those social systems. I will conclude by saying that across all of those challenges, what has helped us the most is really, the intentions of curiosity and transparency. And it sounds a bit naive to say that, but I truly believe in it. It wasn't that hard to be able to connect with people. It wasn't that hard to be able to explain our approach and to be able to get useful feedback from people. But being able to stay with that curious mindset, being able to force ourselves to ask questions, being able to honestly express what is our intention, what are we trying to do, helped us the most in getting useful feedback from people and getting people to share how this was affecting their lives and helping them on that. Voilà, that's it.